So again, I'm joined by Greg Simons, who has again been to Russia. How come, Greg?
There was an information forum which was held under the auspices of the Information for All program with UNESCO in a place called Khanty-Mansiysk, which is a little east of Tyumen, so it's in Western Siberia. And the event, it was the sixth time the event was held about tangible and intangible aspects of communication. So it's political, social, preserving languages, manipulation of language and consciousness, and lots of different themes about the digital environment especially. So artificial intelligence, as well as preserving different languages. For example, if we look at the name of that town, Khanty-Mansiysk, it's created from the two local tribes, the Khanty and the Mansi, Khanty and Mansi tribes, which have a lot of similarities to the North American Indians tribes in terms of their culture and song and other different aspects.
So this is interesting because the ethnic makeup of Russia, I think, is what makes it an empire. And Russia is today accused of imperialism because of the war in Ukraine. It obviously has unclear borders, and Medvedev said recently that Russia's borders are Russia has different sorts of borders, strategic borders and juridical borders. So being in a place like that, how did you sense Russia's identity?
Well, I mean, it's very multi-varied. I mean, you do see evidence of, for example, how the residential houses are built and colored. For example, it's not typical Russian. It's got these influences of the local tribes into how they're shaped and into how they're colored. It's got a library for preserving the languages, the Khanty and the Mansi. So, and you can see a number of the tribes people there who are Russian citizens, but have an ethnic origin other than Russian. So it's quite a multi-varied place. And there are this from the Finno-Ugric group, the Khanty and the Mansi. So we got that particular influence. But you can see all these different things, and they're quite proud of this heritage of the city, because it's a semi-autonomous okrug, the region here. And so, I mean, they're part of Russia, but they're something else too. Within this Russian identity, you have these other layers of identity.
And did it seem like Russia is managing the balance between these two identities in a harmonious way?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's several identities, yeah, because those two tribes plus, yeah, so they have a good balance. I mean, it's helped because, I mean, it's extremely rich in oil and so forth, this region. So they put a lot of that money back into the community in terms of preservation of local identity, culture, and things like this. And they have, as I told you, this language library, I think they call it. So, I mean, UNESCO is quite active there because of that, with the coming together of these languages, culture, and identity. And they do a lot of work on it, preserving this what was, I mean, this identity before it became a part of, well, the Russian Empire, and then now the Russian Federation.
So UNESCO was involved with this conference, and that's of course a United Nations organ, and that means that Russia is still active in the international fora, at least in this.
Yep.
And works actively with the United Nations.
This is specifically part of, this in particular is part of what within UNESCO you've got this Information for All program, which is abbreviated to IFAP. And this is the particular branch of UNESCO that was supporting it. So you had delegates from, I think it was about 60 plus different countries. Of course, the constellation was much more oriented to what you'd call the global south, whereas if we talk some years before 2022, then you had a much more heavy influence and presence of global north, but for obvious reasons, this is not so.
But you were not the only representative of the global north or the west, were you?
No, I mean, there are other ones. There's someone from France, Belgium, there's Italians, so some different Europeans, but from EU countries, but not many. So, I mean, you had a lot. I mean, you even had representatives, a couple of people who are talking to from Nicaragua, quite interesting guys. So you had some different Latinos, Argentina, Brazil, Nicaragua. You had some other different countries. There was someone from Caribbean, from UNESCO, who was, he's from Jamaica, if I remember rightly. So you had quite a broad mixture, plus those from different parts of Africa, Middle East, and also Asia. So there was, there were people from, not so many from Pacific Islands or Australasia, for example, but you had from the Indonesia, and I think Malaysia and other, Thailand and so forth, and quite an Indian contingent.
For a Swedish academic to go to a conference in Russia would entail problems, I think. What about these other Western people who were there? Did you get a chance to talk to them about the academic situation in their country, whether they can get into trouble for this, or if there's a demand to boycott Russia in academic?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of people who will not travel there, but might appear online, for example, because they are afraid they will get cancelled because they traveled there. I mean, so I mean, this is the basic thing. Others will just tend to say thanks, but no thanks, to even minimize any repercussions of appearing online even. So, I mean, not a very free environment for discussion when you have a situation like this. I mean, regardless of the situation, I mean, you need to keep dialogue, and you need to keep understanding what other perspectives are. And the one thing which this conference, for example, and compare that to a conference which I appeared online, which was hosted in Italy, here in Huntington-on-Sea, you had a genuine dialogue. People were sharing, listening, imparting their knowledge, etc. So it was a very equitable exchange of views and ideas and so forth on concrete issues. I got the impression from Italian conference, it was more of a monologue. People went there, that they said something. Of course, they needed to say the obligatory ideological catchphrases and slogans, and
such as,
well, for example, Russia's unprovoked war, the full-scale invasion, and this kept on getting repeated and repeated. There was no such sloganeering in this particular conference.
no. I in my little book that I published, well, that my former employer had published a couple of years ago, when I traveled to the mostly northwestern part of Russia and the Murmansk and area, and there I met with a representative of the Sami people, the Sami, who are also present in Sweden and the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah,
he was one of those, I guess, pro-Western and also at times Western-sponsored civil society activists, but he also had a sort of dual attitude towards Russia, it seems to me.
yeah,
He seemed quite oppositional, but at the same time, I remember he was proud of the Sami contribution to the Great Patriotic War. There was a reindeer transport battalion in the north that helped move military equipment over the snow when nobody else could, and that was a source of pride for him. So
yes,
but now actually after the well, I don't know when exactly, but probably after the war began, I guess his opposition identity took over, and he not sure why, but he actually applied for and I think received asylum in Norway.
okay,
I don't know the circumstances involved in that, but going back, there were some cases of representatives of indigenous peoples going to a conference in New York further back, some, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, I can't remember exactly when, and being stopped from going, had their passports taken at the airport and such. And so these were obviously, you know, indigenous activists, but also with a pro-Western orientation and at least partly sponsored by the West. Did you sense anything,
no, I mean,
you know, like sorry, please.
Sounds very similar what recently happened to Scott Ritter when he had his passport taken as he's about to step on the plane to go to the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Lots of the stuff that happened with sort of our Western friends in Russia is now happening to Western dissidents.
Yes, it's actually quite a growing number of Western dissidents. I mean, it seems to be almost a mirror action of the old Cold War, where you had dissidents from the East going West. Now you have dissidents from the West going East.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, this is a universal phenomenon where people are so at odds with their own societies that they have to seek support or refuge in the opposite camp.
Yeah.
But still, did you sense any of this? I guess there must be a internal conflict within these indigenous groups between the sort of pro-Western activists and more opposition-minded activists who are not, or perhaps subversive-minded, you know, more activist types, and these people who are more or less happy to work with the authorities, or more happy to work with the authorities.
Well, I didn't really see any or hear anyone openly supporting the Western position. I mean, I would have heard that 3-4 years ago, but now, because I mean, even among my more liberally Western-oriented friends who I've known for a long time, who before 2022 were very critical of Putin, now do not criticize because they consider what the West is doing to Russia as a form of collective punishment, and regardless of their position, they will get punished as well. So, I mean, you've had a lot of, I don't know how you would call it, reformed former Western sympathizers, because they just see themselves caught up in this collective punishment, and they see that they're getting punished, and no matter what they do, they can't escape it, even if they're innocent or whatever. So it's better to support and rally behind the flag of the country.
Yeah. So about flag rallying, what's your impressions of the mood in Russia? Last time when we spoke after the presidential elections that you observed on the invitation of the Russian Civic Chamber,
Yep.
Readers
I mean,
who saw that video will know that you found
it's
the mood to be quite patriotic and but in a relaxed and sensible way. That people supported their country, and that the high voters turnout was a manifestation of that patriotic spirit, not a gung-ho spirit, but a sound patriotic spirit in light of the conflict with the West.
Oh, yep.
Any sort of
it's a very odd feeling. Yep. It's a very odd feeling because, okay, you know, to the West, there's a war going on. And I mean, you're getting many hundreds, maybe even more soldiers on both sides dying each day. So, you know, it's a bloody attritional war going. But in Moscow, in Khanty-Mansiysk, you wouldn't think there's a war going on because everything is normal. I mean, there is no real sign of it. You don't see lots of soldiers on the street. Okay, I mean, I drove past that big park with captured NATO equipment, which is one kind of sign. You know, that one they have outdoors, this big exhibition in Moscow. Near this museum of the Great Patriotic War, they got all this captured NATO equipment free of charge. You can walk in and look at all kinds of, including Swedish
Leopards, CV90s.
equipment. What's that?
CV90, the combat vehicle 90,
yes.
or Leopard tanks, maybe.
Yeah. Those are all there.
Yeah.
Including some captured intact ones. And so, I mean, okay, that's an outward sign. I mean, drove past the Crocus City Hall, and you can see the burnt exterior still.
Where the terrorist attack on the concert audience happened, yeah.
Yeah. So you get these kind of subtle hints that, yes, something is going on, but you have to look quite hard because it's not very evident. Everyone's going around doing their thing. And they're kind of not bothered with the West anymore because they believe that there is no real future to have any kind of meaningful attempt at relationship at this stage, because I mean, the Western leaders are acting quite recklessly, to say the least. I mean, ratcheting up things. For example, if we look, the US ambassador to Russia was summoned to the foreign ministry today, and what was reprimanded with the use of that American reconnaissance drone off Crimea, which was probably guiding those Attacker missiles into Sevastopol. So, but I mean, if you look at the average person on the street, they're doing well. You look at the prices in the shops; they're cheaper than Sweden. In many cases, much more variety. Everything is functioning smoothly, public transport and so forth. I mean, when you go on the metro, this is not the Stockholm metro. It actually functions, and you have a modern transport and infrastructure. So it's another world. It's like different realities, parallel ones.
Did you fly Aeroflot from? Did you go by Istanbul, or how did you get to Russia?
Yeah, the so-called Turkish Express via Istanbul.
And from Istanbul, did you fly a Russian Aeroflot or other Russian company, or?
No, Turkish Air is really thanking Western sanctions. I mean, they're making a killing in terms of having a massive market share of flights in and out of Russia and across Russia. They've got a huge number of connections. So one can only vaguely imagine the massive corporate profits they're making at the moment. But from Moscow, for example, to Khanty-Mansiysk, that was with Aeroflot.
Okay, I'm asking because it has been reported previously that Russian aviation is in trouble because of our sanctions. They can't get hold of spare parts, and it's actually risky to fly with Russian aircraft. But you flew Aeroflot to Khanty-Mansiysk, and it felt okay.
Yes, it was perfectly okay.
Yeah.
Well-maintained aircraft. Can't remember what it is, but I mean, unlike China, of course, Russia has its own domestic civil aviation production, so they're able to produce their own. And also, I mean, when the West started impounding Russian aircraft in Western airfields, Russia paid in kind Western aircraft on Russian airfields. So probably that they do have parts for those ones, but they are transitioning to a much more Russian produced fleet.
So any other impressions?
Well, I mean, the thing was that what surprised me is, as a researcher and someone who's keeping track of the news, I mean, you know what's happening. I mean, you and I have been following what's happening in Dagestan, what's happening in Belgorod, Crimea, and so forth. And what you see on the streets of Moscow, Khanty-Mansiysk, it's like, and of course earlier St. Petersburg, which I've been to, I mean, it's like none of this is happening. It's somewhere completely different. So, and you do see the odd recruitment poster, which is around. But I mean, for example, you'd expect, okay, if you're at war and you're having, you're having thousands who are volunteering rather than getting beaten off the street, what's happening in Ukraine with the press gangs. I mean, they're actually volunteering, but you don't see any evidence of them, like squads of soldiers on the street. You just don't see it. Unless, of course, it's May 9th or some particular significant day like this. So, and I mean, it's like, it's in some ways even more normal than, for example, in Sweden, you get these hysterical things about what Russia's going to do to Sweden and the whole so-called free world. I mean, you don't get that. You don't get this hysteria there. I mean, they will call out things. I mean, you do have, of course, Medvedev, who provides some entertainment with some spectacular statements, but it's a much more calm environment because people mind their own business. And I mean, okay, I mean, some of them do have fathers or sons, nephews who are at war, and of course they have a concern for them, and you have this, the population are behind the military effort in Ukraine, but you don't get this like you get here in the West, where they're saying, well, if we don't stop Russia and Ukraine, they're going to take over the whole of Europe, blah, 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 recreate Soviet Union, recreate Russian Empire, something like this. That is absent.
So if I mean, the West's goal with this war is to induce regime change and a revolution in Russia, it seems that result is still quite far off.
I think it's even getting further off because it's too obvious, it's too vulgar and blunt, that it actually drives the Russian public more towards the government than away from it, because they believe that the West is not their friend, because the West has been, well, enacting all kinds of sanctions against the Russian people, which it said it would not do. It said it would target the government and not the people. But like many things the West says, it does not strictly follow. So, and of course, they are absolutely aware of this. So they see that they've got more to lose if the Russian government falls. And of course, bearing in mind that you've got sufficient people who remember what happened in the 1990s, so that they don't want to revisit those times again, the times of Bezpredel, without limits, with this Western-friendly Yeltsin government and the utter chaos for the average Russian.
Yeah, I should correct what I said before, that the patriotic sense that you experienced during the elections is not just due to the war, but also due to the social and economic progress of Russia over the last decades, which is now continuing despite our sanctions and the war.
Yeah,
things are getting better, and they are a lot better than they have been in Russia.
Oh yes, the standard of living is rather decent there, to say the least. It's, I mean, it seems counterintuitive because everyone has been kind of groomed into this idea that economic warfare is this kind of annihilator of everything and anything. So it's this kind of nuclear option without actually irradiating everything. You just destroy the whole economy and so forth. But I mean, economic warfare has a very shady history, and it can have very unpredictable results. For example, I mean, when the United States applied economic warfare on the Empire of Japan to stop them from being aggressive,
they attacked Pearl Harbor.
Exactly, and then took over all of the Western colonies in Southeast Asia.
So, anything else? Moscow. Did you meet people in Moscow?
Yeah, I met a few people. So, I mean, They seemed cheerful. I mean, they are more or less resigned to not traveling to the West and having minimal Western contacts, because you know what we're talking about earlier, that this perceived risk by Western researchers, if you have anything to do with Russia or Russian researchers, then you know you have this risk to your credibility, your career, etc., etc. This very toxic kind of cancel policy. And they're making perfectly good contacts with the global south, and they're establishing very fruitful ones. So, I mean, the West is being replaced, and this was predictable.
Still, don't they miss the Western contacts and colleagues a bit, and the conferences in the West, going to London, Paris, Berlin? And would they like to come
Well,
there again in the future? You think?
well, I think it's a it's a mixed thing for them, because on the one hand, I mean, they see the unrest which is happening in Western countries. I mean, like you've had on again, off again, these yellow vests in France, for example, or these what do you call them? These different marches for different things against COVID, against Ukraine war, against the WHO, against all these different things. They see high inflation, deindustrialization. I mean, they understand that the Europe, which is in their minds, is probably gone. So, I mean, it's a bit like when some people, well, I admit myself, my first trip to Russia, I was still, and this was January 96. So not a prosperous time, but I was imagining something at the worst of the perestroika glasnost times of big deficits in the supermarkets and things like this. And took some really weird things with me in my luggage, mostly foodstuffs, and got there and discovered, well, it's not quite what I imagined. So, I mean, there are other different things which I discovered, which didn't fit to your preconceived notions and these kind of stereotypes which are produced. And of course, I think Russians can take things a bit more personally if they know, if they've known a person for a long time, and then all of a sudden they just stop talking to them, they just disappear. I mean, it's taken somewhat personally because it's a personal affront. This idea of friendship is taken to be a much more serious thing than maybe it is in the West, which I have found. So, I mean, if you're consistent like me, I mean, it's no problem. It doesn't matter what's happening. I treat the person the same, whether there is a war on or whether there's not a war on. So, yeah.
So at some point, maybe we will still get a resumption of ties, but that's surely far, far ahead. Where do you see the war is going right now? You follow the war more than I do every day, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, the Ukrainian military is getting ground down, physically and mentally. They're getting ground down.
Even more than before.
Yeah, it's said, and from different sources, they're losing around 900 a day soldiers. I mean, that was not sustainable before. It's definitely not sustainable now. Yeah, you got a Russian military which is growing massively, and are not squandering their troops like the Ukrainian commanders are doing. I mean, they're just atrocious kind of use in military tactics. I mean, well, we heard what they've been doing during their much vaunted offensive by running them over minefields. These relatively moderately or lightly trained infantry over minefields. I mean, it's reminiscent of what the Soviets were doing against the German Wehrmacht defenses, clearing the minefields with people. I mean, the war itself is not sustainable physically, and I think mentally. You're just getting a lot of Ukrainians, which are men, which are trying to head for the border by all means. I mean, they're not capturing like one or two of them. I mean, the other day, I think yesterday or the day before, they caught nearly 40, 50 of them in a group, which are trying to cross the border. So, I mean, this is accelerating, that this is not diminishing. And when it comes to that, I mean, low morale, I mean, they can't get people, they have to beat them up and drag them into a van. And this is their recruitment strategy. I mean, you get it on Ukrainian channels as well. I mean, well, one has to say it's not a viable recruitment strategy at all. I mean, it's reminiscent of the days with the British Merchant Navy, when one day you're happily drinking ale at a pub, the next day you wake up with a sore head on the high seas. Welcome to the Merchant Navy.
Yeah, those who were eager to fight, they volunteered early in the war, I think, in Ukraine, and they are now injured or killed or well, or still fighting, of course. But
yeah,
if they haven't volunteered during the last 2.5 years, that means they really don't want to fight.
No, and you're getting a lot which are not wanting to fight, which are going anywhere but there. And I mean, Zelensky, I mean, damn, he makes Biden look like a popular president by now, because I mean, he's broken everything he stood for in his election.
Yeah, the peace promises of peace. He still has his peace formula that he tries to market with this conference in Switzerland recently. And we play along with it. It surprised me that he actually chose some points from this peace formula, like, well, food security, you know, like Ukraine should export its grain. Well, okay, that's probably a well-chosen point, more or less. But then nuclear security, they actually had that as a point, talking point in this conference, as in focus. How could you focus on nuclear security while avoiding the fact that Ukraine is firing on the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia?
Zaporizhzhia, yeah.
I mean,
no,
did they
it's
get
nonsense.
through all that conference without actually mentioning this fact? And
yeah, no. I mean, this is, I mean, the biggest illustration of that children's fairy tale with the emperor with no clothes. I mean, if there ever was one.
Yes.
And when you get, even when you get the Colombian president, which are under huge US pressure, saying, I'm not signing this. You know, they had that pledge at the end. And I mean, you had countries were just saying, no, I'm not going to. It's a waste of time. It's nothing about peace. I mean, it's some public relations stunt, publicity, because they're out of the news largely, and they're losing a war.
Still, though, I saw that list of countries signing for that declaration, which was watered down, but still sort of sided with Ukraine. And I think on that list, I found Hungary and Slovakia.
Oh, yes. No, so, I mean, Serbia did as well, but
yeah,
I think this is diplomacy rather than anything meaningful, because, I mean, if we look today, I mean, the EU has found a loophole and excluding Hungary's objection to seizing those Russian assets which Hungary says is an absolutely stupid and counterproductive idea, and they're right. And now that the van der Leyen, the unelected official, and her stooge, this what's his name, that Mr. Garden, the garden in the jungle, Borrell. Yeah, I mean, they live in a fantasy world. They have no clue what they're doing. They just seem to be wanting to please the US, like little children.
Yeah.
We'll please the US by doing this. But okay, you have deindustrialized. Basically, what's left are financial services and the likes. Who is going to ever put any money in financial services if you steal other people's assets?
Yeah, they're going to give the proceeds to Ukraine.
Simple.
The proceeds. They're not giving the assets, but they're giving the proceeds, which, of course, belong to
they don't. Yeah, they don't give the proceeds. They're lending the proceeds. So I mean, it's even more cynical than what you anticipate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound very sound.
Oh, well, it's anything but sound, but this is the kind of caliber of leader we get in the West these days.
I understand Borrell is expected to be replaced by Kaja Kallas from Estonia, who is on the Ukraine-Russia issue, of course, even worse or much worse.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like, can we get anything worse than George Bush? No. Yes. Can we get anything worse than that? No. Yes. And I mean, look at the quality of British prime ministers, so to speak. I mean, one after another. Most of them have never been elected. Most of them have been promoted from inside the party.
Yeah, and
they call this liberal democracy.
You mentioned the fact that Rishi Sunak has not been elected in our previous video, and now he's called for an election where he's going to get his party evaporated, it seems.
Yes. And I mean, there was an absolutely hilarious meme which I saw the other day. I think I can't remember if it was Twitter or X, if you call it now, or Telegram, where it said, it was Macron and Zelensky side by side, and Zelensky looks over at Macron and he goes, "You idiot! Why did you call an election? You should just do what I did and cancel the election."
Yeah. Zelensky canceled election, and Russia or Putin says that they're not going to negotiate a peace with Zelensky, but with the parliament in Ukraine.
Yeah, because I mean, traditionally speaking, he's not legitimate because his term has expired, as opposed to the Verkhovna Rada.
So if a Russian regime change or revolution that we are trying to foment is far, far away, or even further away than before, perhaps we are actually moving to a regime change in Ukraine. I mean, people there are at least living, some of them are living with the realities of this war, and especially, so perhaps we're going to see something there.
At the point when there's nothing left to lose, that's when you'll have a huge problem. But I call it one of three ways. If Zelensky does not have the common sense just to leave now while he's still alive, and go abroad and live a nice life with all of his proceeds, which have been acquired during this war, which there's a lot of them. There's one of three scenarios. One, that the neo-Nazi elements within the military and political structures will kill him because he hasn't managed to do what they wanted. The second one, the US will kill him because he's a liability, and he doesn't know he's a liability, which is problematic. The third one, the Mussolini scenario, that somehow he gets abandoned by his security and gets caught by a rather angry lynch mob, and he gets strung up in some square. And this is the way it's going to go eventually. Because he's put them in a situation from which they will never emerge. They will never recover from this war.
Yeah.
And the US is just, I mean, you hear what they say. I mean, they really regard Ukrainian life with utter contempt. They regard it as cheap. I mean, they're saying it publicly. This is the best investment for money. Ukrainians will just die. They'll fight to the last Ukrainian if we keep on supporting them.
Yeah. Well, let's hope those changes happen sooner rather than later.
Oh yes.
Thank you for the conversation.
There are a lot of things at play now. I mean, and I mean, the other interesting, shall we say, coincidence, the British elections are being held on the 4th of July. So the colonizer may have just officially declared themselves to become the colony.
Well, we'll see who wins. I mean, yeah, well, Labour will, of course, be in government, but Farage is getting into this, and
oh, yes.
I don't know what's going to happen with those elections. Still, I mean, their electoral system will probably favor Labour anyway, because Farage will take conservative votes.
They
mostly.
basically have a choice between blue Tories and red Tories.
Yeah, and who would the red Tories be? The
Labour. I mean, they have no policy difference. I mean, on anything substantial. Okay. It's the continuation of the same. They just come in red packaging as opposed to blue.
I mean, yeah, with Labour and the Tories, but if Farage could sort of.
Well, I mean, it's quite stacked against the system, but you never do know. I mean, it's an outside chance. But of course, I mean, he faces a situation of going against the system, and when the system mobilizes, it can create all kinds of interesting obstacles.
Right. Okay, talk to you again soon.
Look forward to it.